Welcome along to the Carp Angler Chronicles podcast. In this episode, we join Julian Cundiff on a journey through the 80s. Now, Julian is obviously someone who's been in the limelight for many, many years when it comes to carp fishing media. So when we got Julian on, we wanted to do something a little bit different that he hasn't done before. What we're going to bring you is a two-parter. As I said, in this episode, we're going to wander through the 80s with Julian. He's going to go into detail about how he got into carp fishing, his experiences along the way, who he met, who was influential on him, how he was tackling the different waters in the 80s. Then for a part 2, which we will be releasing next week, we're going to lead on from that into the 90s. Same thing again, what was influencing Julian? How was he tackling waters? What kind of bait was he using? You're basically going to be immersed in the different eras of carp angling. So hopefully this brings you a little bit of a different perspective of Julian Cundiff. Before we lead into the episode, of course, as always, we are sponsored by Carp Hunter Giveaways. You can find out a little bit more about these guys at carphuntergiveaways.co.uk. I'm a big fan of these guys. They're absolutely fantastic. For those of you who don't know, they do prize draws to suit every budget. You can win bite alarms, rods, bivvies, everything that you can think of pretty much. They have a prize draw for it. So go ahead, check them out. I'm sure you won't be disappointed. Without further ado, let's lead in to this episode with Julian Cundiff. Julian, welcome along. How are you doing?
I'm doing good, mate, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Pleasure. We're honoured. Absolutely honoured. Are you joining us? I haven't asked you, actually. Are you joining us in a tipple of the episode? Are you having a drink with us?
I'm alcohol-free. I've always been alcohol-free, so it's 0.0% Bavarian Holland alcohol-free. Working for the courts from sort of the 80s onwards, it was made clear to me, if you get done for drink driving, your job's gone. And you sort of get used to not drinking alcohol, and I might have a glass of, champagne or a glass of red wine if it's at a birthday party, but it's never done anything for me, to be honest. I don't criticize those that do, but when you work in the court for 38 years, it does sort of put you off beer and marriage.
Yeah, I suppose you see the raw end of it, don't you? And
I accept that. I do see the far right reach of it, but no, fair play to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Pete, what's your tipple today?
So I've got two different ones. So I'm actually in the office today, so I've got these little 330ml cans. So I've gone one with a Harbour Ale, that's a Puffin Tears. And I've also got a tap room, which I've not had before, which is a Dovestone IPA as well.
Fantastic. In contrast to Julian, I am having a bit of alcohol tonight. I've got a few beers. I've got a Waitrose Dutchy Golden Ale. I've got an Old Speckled Hen, a Sharps Atlantic Pale Ale, 2 Hop House 13s, and a Bière Moretti. I sound like a right alcoholic now, don't I?
Sounds like a rider for some of the concerts I've been to.
Yeah. I'll pace myself. I probably won't have them all. We've been drinking. Me and Pete have been drinking way too much on these podcasts, so we do need to quieten it down a little bit. But that's what I'm drinking. So let's crack on. I mean, where do we start, Julian? It's obviously you've been in the industry for a long time. You've obviously been angling for a long time. How did it all start for you?
None of my family or my friends had any interest in fishing whatsoever, and I just happened to be having a bike ride with my mates one day in 1976. So what we're talking about 44 years ago, we just happened to cycle up a railway embankment about 3 miles from home, cycle on the railway embankment, and there was water to the right-hand side. I don't think I would have even called it a pond. I would have called it water. And I looked down the bank, and it would be about June time, July, and there was a guy sat down there behind a screen with 2 fishing rods or whatever they were. I wouldn't have even known they were fishing rods. My mates carried on cycling, and me being inquisitive stopped, chucked my bike down, ran down the steps. So I'd be 13, and he was playing a fish, or the rod was bent, and he landed this fish, and it would be a tench about, I would say about £5.
Nice.
And weirdly enough, this bloke had the best carp connection you could ever think of. It was Eric Hodson, who actually founded the British Carp Study Group, the BCSG,
Yeah.
and the Pike Anglers. I think they were called the Pike Society, and the National Association of Specimen Groups. So this bloke, this what I called an old bloke, he was probably a lot younger then than I am now. So whenever I think about old people, I think, oh my God, he was younger than I am now. And he was tench fishing, and literally I watched him tench fishing for about 20 minutes, came back the next day, and I was hooked on fishing. That was 1976.
Which wasn't long after he formed the BCSG. Was 1969, was it?
1969 with Peter Mohan.
Peter Mohan.
I think because I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was that Peter Mohan couldn't get in whatever the Red Mire people, that it was that sort of era. I think, was it not the Gold, whatever club it was it the Carp, whatever club it was, he couldn't get in, Dick Walker's lot. And I think that Eric said, well, why don't you form your own carp organisation?
Golden Scale Club, was it?
And that's how the Golden Scale Club, that's right. Yeah, the Golden Scale Club. And Eric was a great organizer, and he loved groups, and they formed the BCSG. But the weird thing was, by the mid-70s, and Eric was never a carp angler, really. He was always what I call a specimen hunter. By the mid-70s, he'd no interest in carp fishing whatsoever, and he would always refer to them as steam pigs. You don't want to be fishing for those steam pigs. And, quite rightly, I didn't. So, I literally started off fishing for roach and the small species. And then I progressed to tench. So that would be about, 76, 77. In 78, I took up match fishing. I did that for about 6 months, and I thought, this just isn't for me. I'm having to go at a time I don't want to go fishing, sort of 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I don't even get to choose where I want to fish, because you come out of a hat. And I'm fishing for fish that I don't really want to catch 10 4-ounce roach. I want to catch 1 4-pound tench. So I soon gave that up, and I moved into specimen hunting in about 79. So I started fishing for tench, pike, and eels with Eric.
And whereabouts were you fishing in these early days?
I mean, literally, in the early days, it was Drax Power Station. It was Drax Pond, which actually in those days was known as Brockholes Lake. And then it became known as Big Drax, because Drax was the village, and there was another pond called Little Drax. And I fished at Three Lakes Selby, I fished farm ponds, just literally wherever I could go on my push bike, or my dad was prepared to take me and bring me back the same day. So I would say within a radius of 7 miles.
Wow. Yeah. And this is obviously in Yorkshire, isn't it?
Yeah, this is in Yorkshire near Selby. So it was, I mean, I'm fishing a lake there that had, and I dropped on a lake there that had pike to £30, tench in those days to £7, roach to 2.5, eels to 5, and bream to 10. And although I didn't know it, it had carp to mid-doubled. Now that is a specimen hunter's paradise. Yeah, and remember, that's 1976 to 1980, and I'm just thinking this is normal.
That's quite a start, isn't it? That really is quite a start. Yeah.
Very blessed.
Yeah. When was it you realized that actually, what you were fishing was a real premier specimen water?
I think it was when I caught a 6-pound tench in about 78, and I sent it in to one of the fishing magazines, and it won me it actually won me an Abu 505, the close face reels, the golden, and they were making a big fuss of it. I thought, well, this is not even one of the biggest ones there, and I realised how big it was then. When I started reading the fishing magazines, so I started reading Angling Times, and it was clear that the fish that I were catching were fish that, the older blokes would have liked to catch. So I realised how blessed I was to have literally a specimen hunter's paradise 3 miles from my house.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
Ouse is very close to Selby, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the River Ouse runs through Selby, but I never was. Eric was never a river fisherman, and I was never. I fished for pike in the rivers, but I was never a river fisherman. I like this the sedate pursuit of fish. So I loved, although I'm very busy when I'm fishing, the sedate pursuit. I don't want to be having to wind in and recast and wind in and recast. I quite like the sedateness of it all. That's why tench and bream and eels and dead baiting for pike were always my first choice.
What was your first fish?
First fish ever was a perch of 4 ounces caught spinning with a Devon minnow.
Wow.
First ever, and first ever. That was. I've still got a picture of that, and it was a 4 ounce perch caught spinning with a Devon minnow. Because in those days, that was the traditional style that you span. It was a 6-foot Woolworths Tokars when Woolworths had their own brand of fishing tackle called Winfield, and it was a Tokars. I think it was solid glass fibre rod, 6-foot green, with an Intrepid Black Prince reel. And we fished for anything we could I could catch, but I got more excited by a 3-pound tench than I did by an 8-ounce perch. And I've always been more of I've not been a predator fisher. I've always been more of a sedate float fisherman, ledgerer, as it was called in those days. You either float fished or you ledgered.
Yeah, definitely. Those have got a few Devon minnows. They're really quirky old things, aren't they? I bet they'd still catch as well, although I imagine not many.
Absolutely,
yeah, definitely. Okay, so I mean that brings us up to late 70s, right? When you started kind of specialist angling.
Yeah, late 70s, sort of 79 was the year that I became really obsessed with fishing more than my O levels, which resulted in a glorious failure of the O levels and having to go back a year, which was the best thing ever because whereas all my friends went on in later years and did A levels, university, and in effect went on the job market in about the mid 80s. I went on the job market in 1980 when it was a lot easier to get a job. So failing my O levels was the best thing ever. And I failed them purely simply because I was more obsessed with reading Course Angler than mathematics textbooks. And we all know in those days the exams, from March through to probably June was the exams period when you had to revise. Well, that was the best time ever for going fishing, So the two didn't mix. But I was a specimen hunter in those days. Eric would fish every weekend. I'd join him. And we, it was fishing, fishing girls and motorbikes. But I was more successful with fishing than I was with girls, certainly.
That changed though, didn't it? Because you were voted sexiest man in angling.
As
people have made a big fuss about recently.
Oh god, yeah. It's like it just dragged the reigning and undisputed. They never had the competition again. So here we are, 27 years undisputed. It was one of those things. But I absolutely loved my fishing, and I still do. It was. I can't explain it. It's just like my dad loves cricket. I love Formula One. But if somebody said to me, explain fishing, it really is quite daft. But there again, so is riding 70 miles or climbing a hill or watching cricket all day. There is, it's one of those things, isn't it? You either get it or it's not one of those things you can do. You either love it or you don't love it. It's not what I call a grey thing. People don't just flit in and out of fishing. It's either their hobby or it's, well, that's pretty stupid, isn't it? There's no middle ground with fishing.
Yeah, because it's not a logical thing. We all love it so much because it stirs up passion within us and emotion. You can't describe emotion or passion, can you? So it's like you say, you get it or you don't get it. It's impossible to describe it.
And I was lucky; I got it from day one. Watching that, watching the fishing, I got it from day one. But it's not always just been about the fishing. I love the history of fishing, the personalities, the books, the films, I'm a fisherman rather than a cat. I don't have to catch. I just have to give it my best shot. So
Yeah.
it's never disappointing me fishing because I've always been about the journey rather than the destination. So what other people have caught has never really bothered me other than inspired me to try harder. I've never judged my enjoyment of the sport by the size of the fish I've caught. And if somebody said, well, give you £1,000,000 now, if you can tell me an ounce or two, your biggest carp, pike, eel, tench and bream, I genuinely wouldn't have a clue because they were a memory rather than a weight.
Yeah. Absolutely. So I mean, Eric Hodson, for those that don't know, I mean, he's quite a poignant figure back in that day and age. You were kind of, I want to say apprentice, but for want of a better word, I mean, you were. He was showing you the ropes, was he?
Eric saw something in me, my love of fishing that wasn't. There was a couple of us that he, I don't want to say befriended, that were interested in fishing. But of all those people, I was the only one who was interested in the history, in, what made fish tick, about going fishing, about the books and things. So I think Eric saw something in me, somebody that wasn't just interested in catching the biggest or the most or just going fishing. So yeah, I was definitely Eric's apprentice, and without Eric Hodson, certainly I don't know there would be a Julian Cundiff in fishing, really, to be honest, and I owe most of this to Eric.
Yeah, definitely. And did you get involved with or spend any time with Peter Mohan? I mean, it probably wasn't like this, but I always imagine them, fishing together because
no, they were pretty. I think they were. It would almost like being put in. It's like Dragon's Den. They may work together on screen, but they were both pretty strong characters, and there was never a first and second in command. Peter was out and out a carp angler. I think he liked his bridge as well, whereas Eric was always a specimen hunter that had the ability to be a great organizer as well. I mean, so Eric was the specimen hunter. Peter was really the carp angler. So I never ever saw them together. Well, I think I did once see them together, but no. I think I met Peter twice, and I spoke to him a couple of times, and he famously once told me that I would never be in the BCSG while I was a friend of Tim Paisley's.
Yeah. And perhaps would definitely like to hear more about that a little bit later. So, I mean, moving on from there, was there a certain time or if ever that fishing kind of really overtook your life? I know you said it overtook your exams, but as a young lad, it's not easy to have, not hard to have something overtake your exams. Was there a point where it kind of really started monopolizing your most of your time and all of your thoughts, etc.?
I think I was very lucky, really, in that I've always loved music as well, as much as and I've always loved motorbikes, and so I had this three-way balancing system. I love my fishing, I love music, and I always say to people, I went to a concert before I ever went fishing. I saw Kiss in 1976 at the Manchester Free Trade Hall before I ever caught a fish. So I absolutely adore music. I adored fishing, and I adored motorbikes. And I'm one of those people, I can never discard stuff. So I don't easily get taken in by stuff, but when I do, it's there for the rest of my days. So if somebody has to describe me now that knew me 25 years ago, they would say, oh my God, does he still like fishing? Does he still like Kiss? Does he still like, American wrestling? Does he still like motorbikes? Does he still have long hair? I'm one of those people who I've never bothered what other people have thought about me and my interests. And I've never sort of jumped on things. So although fishing probably at times, probably the 90s, as I'll discuss, became too, it overbalanced the rest of my life. As a kid, it was my parents always instilled on me, you've got to pass your exams, you've got to go, and things like that. So I loved it, but I also loved the concert. So no, it never drowned me, thank God, if that's the right expression.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it seems like every passion of yours kind of shines through the others, maybe, because I'm sure you've written extensively about Kiss and about your
Oh yeah.
motorbikes, and it's, it's almost, I mean, you've been so prevalent in the media, certainly through the years of me carp fishing, that it's almost like I sort of know you without chatting to you, just because you do seem like an open book with these passions
Yeah,
of
oh yeah,
yours.
yeah. I don't hide what I like. I tell people what I like, and I would like to think when anybody meets me, they'll go, God, he's just like we
Just like
expected
it.
he would be. Yeah, which is, which is great. I love talking about motorbikes. I love talking about music. I love talking about fishing. So yeah, I'm a pretty open book. I am what you see or read about.
Yeah, which is possibly a rare thing in this day and age,
Yeah, it is.
unfortunately.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. We're up to early 80's. What was going on in your world of angling then?
Well, in 1980, obviously, I got a job working for the court, which was great. So instead of having like £5 or £10 a week pocket money, all of a sudden you go to £200, £300, £400 a month salary, which makes a huge difference to what you can buy. So instead of having to buy stuff on credit from Bennett's of Sheffield check spread, I was actually able to buy it. I was actually able to buy decent gear. So I would go to Trevor Moss's tackle shop, which was one of the first specialist shops. That was in Gainsborough, and I could actually buy the gear I wanted rather than having to get it from Woolworths or from Bennett's of Sheffield. So my fishing started to progress. I was no way a carp angler, but they were just another fish to me. But that was I didn't want to say the indoctrination of Eric, but that was what Eric instilled on me. A pike was a pike, a tench was a tench, and a carp was just a steam pig. And naively, I had seen carp in the shallows at Drax, and I wasn't an experienced angler, and I just thought they were record tench. So I saw these fish, and I used to say to Eric, there are record tench in here, mate. I have seen tench into double figures. Well, of course, they were actually carp that were into double figures, but Eric never let on, and I never really realised there were carp in Drax until we were throwing some bread in, because you get bored, and all these fish were slurping them off the surface. And I thought, they're not tench, they're not roach, they're carp. But Eric was always very careful to steer me away from carp. They're steam pigs. You're a good tench angler. We fish a pike in the winter, tench in the summer, bream in the autumn. So I was a decent specimen hunter, and a good amount of tench to my name, a bream and pike.
Do you feel that was because Eric kind of wanted you to work your way up the ranks, so to speak?
I think it was 50-50. He had fallen out of love with carp fishing. I think he'd been pushed to one side in the BCSG. I don't know. He'd found what was really a premier tench water, and that kind of fishing suited him. He didn't have to spend 2 or 3 days bivvied up. He was one of the old school anglers, and I think it suited him. And I think it was a 50-50 of he didn't want me to run before I could walk, and he had fallen out of love with carp fishing. And I think it would be like me trying to persuade somebody to pike fish or match fish. He simply let me follow him, and I was, I don't think I even caught a carp till about 1982, and I think that was purely by accident.
Was your first carp caught by design or by accident?
No, pure. In fact, I think I had a couple of single figure carp from various farm ponds whilst float fishing for tench, and they were just. They were nothing. I loved tench, and I loved pike, and I loved eels, and I loved the beauty of roach. And these were scruffy little 4 to 7 pound carp that really didn't ignite my desire at all.
What year was it you caught your first carp then?
I would think it would probably be about 1982. As in carp, as in any sort of carp. But I think 83 was the first time I caught a double. And that was purely by accident, because we were fishing with sweet corn. I mean, sweet corn, what a bait. I mean, the late 70s to early 80s, sweet corn made everything, you know, tench, bream, roach. You couldn't go wrong. And we would just use sweet corn side hooked, or, you know, we'd thread 3 or 4 pieces on a size 8 or 10 or 12 hook, and every so often we get bust off and we think we'd lost the record, you know, the record tench, and we were back winding with Mitchell's, because I hadn't actually got my Cardinals then. It was just Mitchell reels, and then one day I had this churn as you back wound, and I got this thing in, and it was a double figure carp, and I think it was about 12 pound. I mean, I'd have to, you know, as I say, I'm rubbish on weight. It would be about 12 pound. All of a sudden, I don't know what it was. I just thought, wow, this is. I had a 5 and a 6 pound tench in a session, which are specimen carp, and a 12 pound carp, specimen tench, and a 12 pound carp was just a, you know, it's a low double. But there was something about that double that all of a sudden it was like, ooh, this is interesting.
Yeah, definitely. And by this time, are you driving, or you got a motorbike or anything?
I had a moped. I mean, I was a traditional push bike, dad's transport. 1980, joined the court, get your first moped, a little 50, a Suzuki TS50. Then you get yourself I got myself a TS100, and then in 1982. Because you could ride up to I think it was 100 cc's, and then I passed my test, which meant you could ride 250 and above. So in 1982, I got my first 250 motorbike. So then all of a sudden, you know, you weren't restricted to about 8 miles at 27 miles an hour or 22 miles an hour with fishing tackle. So I started traveling a little bit further afield. But yeah, I got a motorbike then, and I'd caught my first double.
Nice. Very nice. So the transition, I guess, from your tench fishing into the carp. What was the carp scene like then for you, sort of locally to where you were?
There wasn't a carp scene. There was no carp scene until, I mean, obviously I'm an avid reader, and I read Course Angler. I was never really impressed with Angling Times and the Angler's Mail, because they were always like news program, newsy, whereas Course Angler had specialist, Colin Dyce's magazine, it had specialist articles. I was a member of the NESG, so you get proper articles on tench, and this was before carp fishing had exploded. Yes, the hare was in existence in the early 80s, but carp fishing hadn't exploded to the masses. Carp fishing was something that you did when you were 30 onwards, and so there was as much about bream, tench, eels, pike as there ever was about carp in the general fishing magazine. So, you know, I'd read a carp article now and again, but I'd read 2 tench articles. You know, the NESG was the National Association of Specimen Groups. It wasn't a carp group by any stretch of the imagination. You might have one carp specialist within the group, but you'd certainly have more pike, tench and bream specialists. And, you know, I wasn't really taken in by carp fishing. I remember getting carp fever, and I read that and I thought, oh, this is interesting. And when carp fishing exploded for me was, I went to Drax one day, and it would be about, I think it was 82 or 80, maybe 83, and there was 2 younger guys. Now, when I say younger guys, they would probably, I was 20 then, and they would probably be 25, and they were bivvied up. They had umbrellas with sides on them. They had two rods each, or might have had 3, but certainly 2, and they were and they had cardinal reels. And I thought, oh, they're not tench fishing, and they were although they were the young school, they were the old school of don't tell us anything. So we're only tench fishing and all stuff like that. But I knew they weren't. And one of them was reading The Carp Strikes Back. And I was, you know, we all know what we're like. I would pester them and speak to them. And in the end, one of them gave up and said, just take that and read that. And it was The Carp Strikes Back by Rod Hutchinson. And that was the pivotal moment. When I read that, I got carp fishing. Carp Fever was the textbook, but The Carp Strikes Back was without a shadow of a doubt the inspiration for me. When I read that, I understood why it was going to be carp fishing and nothing else.
So that was a big influence on you then.
Oh, I'm the most unhutchy person you'll ever fish. I am Kevin Maddox, so I'm very technical.
Hmm.
You know, I'm that kind of angler. But Rod Hutchinson's book was what inspired me to go carp fishing. So that would be 83, and I was really starting to struggle then with catching tench. You know, they were lovely, but I'm thinking I really should be carp fishing here. And in '84, I was shown the hair rig, and you know, the world was never the same again.
Yeah, no, I can believe it. So that's before my time, but no, I can believe that. So I was going to ask how you found that transition from the tench fishing to carp, but I imagine with the introduction of the hair rig, it only sort of helped things out there.
It was because we were in the early 80s, before the hair rig. You were making trout pellet paste, you were side hooking the pellet paste, you're having to sit and strike runs. And to be honest, it was you know, it is so easy nowadays with the hair rig. You were having to sit on your rods, you were missing runs. And I remember this lad in 1984 on the pond, and you know, we were fairly friendly, but he was probably 4 years older than me, far more experienced, and he brought down the hair rig to show me, and it was Bayer Pearl and 1.7, and it was hung underneath this hook, and there was a bit of matchstick, and he got a boilie on it. It was a proper boilie, and it looked absolutely ridiculous. And I remember saying to my girlfriend at the time, I said, "Oh, Chris, he's a bit of a wind," and he was a wind-up merchant. I says, "He's winding me up here." I said, "I'm going to chuck it out, and if it doesn't go within 10 minutes, I'm not bothering with that. I'm going back to the side hooking or whatever I called it." I chucked it out, and literally within 5 minutes, you didn't have to strike. It screamed off. It was hooked, and it went to the net. And after that, I thought, wow, it was the biggest advance ever in fishing. The hair rig. I would say that 90% of people fishing nowadays would not go fishing if self-hooking rigs did not exist. I was at least 90%, and it made carp fishing easy. I love it, but it certainly made carp. That was it. That was the pivotal moment when I was given the hair rig, and I realised I actually could fish all night without killing myself for the next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And with sort of like, so this transition period, we're not talking like a long time, are we?
Oh no.
Had you been sort of writing anything for magazines regarding the tench side of things, or?
Yeah. I'd my mum. I was absolutely crap at school. I had no interest in school, and I came from a grammar school. I'm not being critical, but if you ever were at grammar schools, they were very much about the achievers and not very much about the also-rans. And I was one of those kids. I wasn't thick, but I certainly wasn't an achiever. And you were left to your own devices. It was like, well, unless you were going to be an A-level student, you were going to join the cricket club, you were going to go skiing. It's, you know, you had to tick certain boxes in those days to get on. And the only subject I was any good at was English, and I got the ability to write. My mum was a writer as well, and I love reading, be it, you know, sounds for music or anything I read, and I love reading. And so you know, you progress from reading to writing. And the first time I ever appeared in print was 1978. And I wrote into Course Angler, and I asked a question of Ask Billy. I think he was called Billy Knott, and he was this old bloke, and they answered my question, and I've still got that cut in 1978. So that was the first time I ever appeared in print. And then I caught a couple of good tench that I sent in, and I won Angling Times Young Kingfish, could have been a Kingfisher Guild or something. I won a few prizes, so I started getting my picture in the print. I joined the National Association of Specimen Groups, and their first magazine was called Freeline. And I wrote a few articles on pike fishing, tench fishing, and bream fishing, just 1-2 page articles, and I enjoyed that. So there's no carp article. I wasn't carp fisherman. So yeah, I'd appeared in print a few times.
And this was purely on the hobby side of things, the writing as well.
God, yeah, it was just a hobby. Oh, look, you weren't getting paid in those days, and I don't think I ever got paid for an article until 1988. So
Okay.
yeah, 88. So there was no money in writing then. Certainly, unless you were one of the big guns writing books. No. So yeah, it was just a hobby. In fact, it still is. I don't write for money, I can assure you.
No, it's very good of you. And then you would obviously enjoy doing things like this as well. So
Oh yeah. It's never been. It's never been about the money at all, ever. It's never been about money.
What's sorry to chip in there. I mean, in this kind of era, what tackle were you using? Do you remember for the carp?
Oh, I can tell you exactly what I was using. I was tench fishing with Northwestern AC2 glass fiber rods with Cardinal 54 reels, and they just weren't strong enough so when in 83, when I realized I was going to be a carp angler, I upgraded them to Northwestern SS6s and SS5s. Now the SS5 was a through action. I mean, nowadays you'd look at it, it was like a stick of chewing gum. It was like a banana. You'd shake it and it'd wobble for about 4 minutes. But in those days that was a proper carp rod. And then the SS6 was more of a distance rod, and then the SS6A was like long range. You could probably do 60 yards with it. So it was the glass fiber rods, and I certainly didn't get a proper rod until 1986, Rod Hutchinson Horizons. So the first carbon fiber rod would be 1986. So it was just upgraded tench tackle, bottom of the range carp tackle.
Yeah. Did you stick with the Abu reels?
Oh yeah, I was always an Abu Cardinal man until about 88, when I realized that the Cardinal 57, which was a huge reel, it just wasn't really a huge reel in the grand scheme of things. No. If you could cast 90 yards with one of them, you'd have to use a shock leader and 8-pound line. So I was always an Abu man, Again, from Eric had the old style Abus, the Cardinal 40s and the 4X. I sort of preferred the more sexy black ones, the 54, the 55, the 155, purely and simply because I always played off the clutch. I never played backwind. I just thought backwind was horrendous, and I always played off the clutch. And in those days, when you played off the clutch, the actual expression was called hangman, because you were letting the carp hang itself off against the clutch. So it wasn't called fishing off the clutch. It was clearly called in the early 80s hangman method. You were letting them hang against the pull of the clutch. I was always an Abu man. They're like Ducatis. They were a work of art that you really should be displaying on a plinth in your house rather than taking them on muddy waters. But yeah, I was always an Abu man.
I've got a Mitchell 300, the old half bale. It's It's the second version, so it's kind of early 40s probably. But they're like proper old thing. Yeah. But I mean, just the engineering of it, and I tell you what, the clutch. People say they're crap by today's standards, and of course they are. But it ain't bad. It really isn't bad, and it's great fun.
They were I always found that the Mitchells were great because they stuck a lot of abuse. They were great for pike fishing because they had they were a big reel in comparison to the Abus, which were a tiny reel.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you're either a Hutchinson man or you're a Maddox man.
Maddox,
or you're a Mitchell fan or you're an Abu fan.
Abu fan, yeah.
It was very, it was very polarized in those days. So, and I was always a Maddox Abu Cardinal man.
that was the
if it's good enough for Kevin, it was good enough for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely yeah. And those Cardinal 55s, they're still gorgeous looking. I mean, they're a bit sexier than the old 300s, I think, but they're just something about them, they're timeless. You were talking to us before about the about your old Yamaha. It's that kind of thing, isn't it? Just that kind of timeless look.
They are. The look of them was they never made a better looking reel than than the Cardinal 55. The 155s were okay, and the 157s were okay, and from a distance they looked exactly the same. They were just a cheaper version. But the original 55, the original 57 were a thing of beauty. That they were a thing of beauty. I mean, the engineering was great, but the plastic spools used to explode, you know, because under pressure you'd tight your line and then explode. But as a thing of, they really are something that you would have in your cupboard to display rather than on your rods nowadays. You know, I'll probably get hung by the old Carp, what is it, the old school Carp Society page for even suggesting that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like everything, like the gold on them. There was that gold kind of sigil, and there was the flash of the red around the drag.
They just got it right. It was just like the Ducati 999 or whatever. It you know, Ducatis are better nowadays and more reliable. They're sexy, but that original Ducati 999, it will, you know, they'll never make a, you know, you got your Formula One cars, you know, that there's an era where that is the sexiest looking thing. But I always think, would that look sexy to a 17-year-old? A 17-year-old probably look at that Abu Cardinal and say, but if you think about it, look at the new Diawas with the gold spools, the black. I'm not saying they look like Cardinals, but there's a hint about them, isn't there? There's that they're more Cardinal than they are Mitchell.
Yeah,
they're bordering on at times. The smaller ones are almost bordering on ABU type quality and looks, aren't they?
The 2600s, even to the little line of red along the back. Okay, the drag isn't there on the Daiwa, but it is on the Cardinal. They've even got that round. You know what I mean? The little bit of red, don't you?
Yeah, they are certainly. There's certainly a hint. Of ABU Cardinals to those, to people who've had them. If you've never had one, you'll not recognize it. But I look at them and go, that reminds me of.
It's a tip of the hat, at least, isn't it?
It certainly
really is. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Sorry, I massively took you and Pete off on a tangent there. I just got, I'm quite into the old tackle things. Obviously, it was, I mean, before my time. Before I was carp angling, but I still love that stuff. I really do.
Yeah, it's lovely
about it. Yeah. So, I mean, where are we up to? We're up to 84, was it? Yeah, hair rigs. Yeah. You joined the Carp Society as well in 84.
Yeah. I've been a member of the I started off being a member of the NASG. And I joined a specimen group, the Ebor specimen group. And technically, I don't think you should have joined the NASG unless you were a member of a specimen group. But I think Eric slipped me in as a member anyway. But I joined the Ebor specimen group, and that was quite interesting. You know, so you've got a couple of guys who like pike, a couple of guys who like carp, but I was sort of getting really pulled. Whenever I was tench fishing, I felt I should be carp fishing. Although I love my pike fishing in winter, because, of course, carp didn't feed in the winter, as we believed. Well, they only fed down south now and again. So I understood pike fishing. But yeah, it was. I joined the Carp Society in 1984 purely and simply because I'd seen edition 1 of the first Carp Fisher, which was Carp Fisher 1, with Mike Wilson with that carp across his chest. I just looked at that. I thought, again, it was that Abu Cardinal. It was that thing of beauty. I read a couple of the magazines and they were so much better than Course Angler, because Course Angler not only covered specimen hunting, but it covered matches, it covered all sorts of course fishing. And the more you get into one sort of side of course fishing, the less I didn't really want to read about who won the world championship in Blatislavia or whatever in 19. It didn't, and I was becoming more and more polarized on the big fish scene. And then, you know, you read the NASG Freeline magazine, which was great, but then all of a sudden you see carp fishing and there's like 92 pages only on carp fishing. It's like, wow. So I joined the Carp site in 1984, for the magazine.
So it was literally just for the magazine back then?
Absolutely, just for the magazine. The magazine was a thing of beauty. It was £1, and I think I actually purchased it from I went to some conference, and they had a pile of, and I bought that, and I thought, wow, it was just like your first naughty book. And it was like, wow, this is, I can still see that magazine the first time. It was like issue 1 of Kerrang for me, or whatever it was. I remember the first issue I read, and I just thought, wow. And I've still got it. It's still in my collection, because I'm one of these people who doesn't throw anything away. And so I got issue 1, and then I realized there was probably another 4 issues to catch up on, but nothing will ever beat Carp Fisher 1 or Carp World 1. And and all of a sudden I started reading about carp fishing, and it really was it was like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you just started to go through the wardrobe.
Kerrang! You jolted a memory for me. Kerrang magazine. Bloody hell, that takes me back. Is that still going? It surprised me.
No, Kerrang was really a thing of its time. It took over from Sounds, I think, in 1980, when new wave of British heavy metal kicked off, and then really from the 80s until grunge kicked in. So it was very, very strong, but of course it hasn't survived the pandemic. It died in the pandemic. But if you were a Kerrang reader in 1984 and read a 2010 Kerrang, you'd think, what the hell is this? It had to obviously pick the market that was buying magazines. So Kerrang of its time was great, but it hasn't survived. But really, between 1980 and I would say 94, it was an incredible magazine.
Yeah, 90s is where I'd have read it. So
you'd have read it in the 90s. Yeah. Up to probably the end of the 90s, it was what I call a rock magazine, and thereafter, of course, it had to spread its wings and take in. I think I saw Oasis in there. I thought, what the hell?
That's not right, is it?
Had to appease the millennials.
Yeah, I love Oasis, but not in Kerrang, guys.
It's kind of it draws a kind of parallel to what we were talking earlier about. Obviously you're involved with Nash. What Nash are doing now, and not to disrespect what they're doing at all, but it's just appealing to the younger generation, which is they're the ones watching the videos. They're the ones on YouTube. They're the ones getting involved with the content. So it's understandable.
Yeah,
it
absolutely.
Really is.
Absolutely. But the Carp, I bought Carp. I joined the Carp Society purely and simply for carp fisher, not because it was the right thing to do.
I mean, back then, what was the Carp Society? Because obviously it's very different now. What was it literally? Ooh. I mean, how would you sum it up to us?
Well, the Carp Society was Tim Paisley, wasn't it? It was the CAA was Peter Moen, and he ran it. It was non-political. It was very dictatorial, and it was very southern based. And I remember Tim Paisley, I suppose, saying to Rod Hutchinson, or Rod Hutchinson said to Tim Paisley, much like Peter Moen said to Eric, I don't agree with X, Y, and Z. And I think Rod said to Tim, well, why don't you start your own organization, or the other way around, whatever it was. And really, it was, it was Tim, Rod, Greg Fletcher. They set up the Carp Society, and the Carp Society really, it exploded in the 80s, because carp fishing exploded. Well, I wouldn't say, no, it exploded in the 90s, but I think it took off. It started to catch off in the 80s. And I think the Carp Society was a more open. The CAA, which I was joined as well, I always felt was very, it was very insular. It felt like a band of 6 or 8 people who were always in. Whereas the Carp Society, I thought, was a wider band. It was more, there were more Carp Society. But again, for a lot of people, you're either a CAA member or you're a Carp Society member. Some of my friends were CAA members, not Carp Society members, but I always felt a kinship with Tim. I would read Tim's stuff and thought, wow, again, it's, timeline. I joined the Carp Society before the CAA, so the Carp Society was my baby. Had I joined the CAA in 1982, I might have thought different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's, yeah. I mean, this is totally off track. Did you ever go down the path of joining the BCSG or not?
Oh yeah, but
Did you?
I applied to join the BCSG in 1992, but I didn't have 10 years carp fishing experience. I think it was 10
Mm.
years, so I'd only got 8, and I got, I got a refusal letter, an explanation, and then I joined, I think, in 96, and I've been a BCSG member certainly for 24, 25 years.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Do
a proud member of the BCSG. Yeah.
it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it seems like now, I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but because social media and things like that is so prevalent, I think a lot of people give social media a hard time. I think it does fantastic
I think it's
things, but
fantastic. I love social media. Love it.
yeah. Do you feel that these kind of organizations almost die of old age because there is this new way to connect to people? I don't know what your
I
thoughts
think
are.
there's always a danger of being stuck in a time warp, and I always said this. And I've just recently granted life membership of the Carp Society for my, my services to the Carp Society. And I would bang on for years and saying, like, look, guys, we need to target the younger people as well. And I think unless you move with the times, you can get forgotten. Like we explained the Coda podcast. I was not on Thinking Tackle, and I was not in certain carp fishing magazines, and it was who is Julian Cundiff. And that's the danger, that unless you are constantly evolving, you won't take in the new membership. And I do think some organizations fall by the wayside. The Carp Society hasn't fallen by the wayside. The Carp Society is still strong. The BCSG doesn't want to be everything to everybody. It's got 500 members. It's something you should, if you want to do, you should strive to join. I always wanted to be a BCSG member because it was something where my peers were members of. You know, when you see Rod Hutchinson and people like that, then and Peter Springate and people like that, for me to be allowed to join that, it was a badge of honor. It doesn't make it any better or me any better. I never do that. It's it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about it. It's how I feel about it. And
Yeah,
I was proud to be in it.
definitely. I mean, BCSG is something I always aspired to be in, and it was, very I mean, really looked up to
Oh
that
yeah.
organization. Funnily enough, I've actually recently applied, literally this week, to finally be in the BCSG. I understand a lot of people don't get accepted on the first one. I'm not necessarily expecting to get accepted, but it's something I've always, aspired to do. And I
Absolutely.
know what you mean about, moving with the times and staying current. I also think it's nice to have something that, perhaps doesn't change as much as other things.
No,
It's
it's a
nice
great
to have that
it's
continue.
a great organization. It produces a non-commercial magazine.
Yeah.
And I always liked it because when I went along, people like Peter Springate, when I was accepted, treated me no differently than he would treat anybody there, which is how I've been brought up. So if I meet a kid who's 15, I don't treat him any different than I would treat Peter Springate. Obviously we've got more in common of our age, but that kid will not know I treat him any different. And the BCSG, when I joined, I felt like it was a fellowship. And if
Yeah.
I ever felt that an organization was looking down on other anglers, I wouldn't be part of that organization, because that's not, if the BCSG became the Keep It Real Brigade, they could have my membership tomorrow.
Yeah. 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 I think I think probably the reality of it is possibly a little bit different from how it's been perceived by a lot of people
Yeah.
over the years, maybe.
I think there was a time when it was where it was somewhat elitist,
Yeah.
but who cares what other people think? I'm proud to be a member of it, and if I wasn't proud to be a member of it, I wouldn't be in it. It's like everybody else who complains about stuff. It's like, okay, well, nobody's making you join. You don't have to join. It's horses for courses, and I was proud to join, and I was almost quite proud to be refused and get in later. It felt it more special.
Yeah. 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 Exactly. Well, it's like catching a carp. If you
Yeah.
caught a carp every chuck, wouldn't be the
Yeah.
same, would it? Yeah, same
No,
kind
not
of
at all.
thing. Yeah. I mean, we've obviously spoken and we touched on your the tackle that you were using. What about baits? What I know you rig. You obviously on the hair rig.
Yeah.
What were you doing for bait back in that day and age?
Richworths, absolutely.
Yeah.
Richworths. I remember going to the tackle shop and they got a lot of boilies in there. There was salmon supreme. There was something in mango. I can't remember. It's something in mango, and it was honey Yucatan.
Yes.
And I remember picking up honey Yucatan and smelling it and thinking, wow, that's nice. And it was freezer bait. And that honey Yucatan was it, you'd go and buy a bag and it was a game changer. Ready rolled boilies, 15 mil, that would catapult out in a straight line. I think it'd be about 300 in a packet. And again, that was a game changer. That honey Yucatan. Salmon Supreme never worked for me. No, never worked for me. But there again, I probably used honey Yucatan so much that it was. I used to soak my hook baits in Jeff Kemp's honey flavour, and so well in advance of glugging and glazing. And I would use the standard honey Yucatans for fishing over. And in those days, I'll never forget, and I used to laugh about this. We started pre-baiting the water. It would be about 85 in the close season, because there was a close season. And I remember we discussed, now we're going to bait up 3 times a week. Now, do we go for 30 boilies 3 times a week, or do we go to 50? And we said, no, we can't use 50 15 millers 3 times a week. It'll be too much. I've dropped more out the catapult and not picked it up nowadays. Genuinely, 30 was okay, but 50 would have been too much. So 150 boilies a week would have been too much.
Times have changed.
Times have changed. And it made, I have to say, it made a difference. Just 90 boilies, we'd catapult in those days, 1 at a time. And they were, very accurate. I soon realized that the more accurate were, the better. And baiting up 3 times a week made a difference. Definitely made a difference.
Definitely. And this is obviously something that I've spoken about a lot on this podcast. I mean, putting the time in, angling isn't just the time that you're sat behind your rod, with your rig in the water. Putting that time into pre-bait will, it can absolutely change your season.
And that suited me because I was doing my law exams, 84, 85 and 86. I was at Manchester. I was, at Manchester doing my law exams through the court. And so in the close season, when you couldn't fish, I would bait up. It was good because I couldn't fish. So I had to study, but going down to the pond at 9 o'clock in the evening, 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday to bait up, didn't interfere with the studying, but kept me in touch with the pond. So yeah, it was good.
Exactly. Yeah. You keep your eye on the ball, don't you? You're still looking for shows. You're seeing where they're moving. You're still in. It's like you're still feeling the pulse of the lake. That's sort of what I liken it to. And you get your fix as well, don't you? You get your fishing fix. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, those honey Yucatans, they were. I was using them after you, obviously. But such a lovely smelling bait, if ever there was one.
The originals were the best. The free, because eventually they almost became a ready-made, a shell. Well, they had to be. They had to move.
They were. Yeah.
They became. Believe you me, the frozen honey Yucatans were a better bait than the shelf life, because of the way they were put, to make them roll and to preserve them. The frozen honey Yucatans were a game changer for me. Game changer.
Yeah, definitely.
And I used those exclusively till about 1986 when I started to make my own bait.
So how did that start for you? I mean, obviously making your own bait. I mean, me and Pete are different. We've done it ever since the very early days in our carp angling, but it was very different back then. Like you had to a lot of the time, right? So talk to me about how you started first making bait.
Well, I have to say, it was again Tim Paisley. You become influenced by your peers, and I'd written my first. I started reading various carp magazines, and if you dumb it down, it was ready-mades and not that good. But if you make your own bait and tweak it, it is a much better. And that's how it was in those days. Ready-mades weren't great. but make your own bait. And when I decided in 1986 I was going to spread my wings further afield in 1987 and fish literally the first water that had a 20 pound in it, which would be the Tylery, I decided that because it was 20 pounders, I really needed to get my game together. I needed to start rolling my own bait. And I remember going to Trevor Moss's, and I bought what I viewed would be a season of bait. And I've got it, and I know that because I've still got my Jeff Kempestini's book of bait, and I wrote in the back of it, 3 bags of Rod Hutchinson's protein mix, and I think inside those bags there was enough for 3 12-ounce, so it was only about 50 ounces of bait inside those. So I bought 3 of those bags and 1 50 ml bottle of flavour, which it'll come to me in a moment. Amaretto, and some sweetener and some colour. And that was the season's bait done. It was the trip to Trevor Moss's in the close season, 3 bags of Rod Hutchinson's protein mix, which came in the light brown bags, and a 50 ml bottle of flavour, some colour. I can't remember, might have had a sweetener, and that was it. And that was going to have to do me between June until I ran out in October. Which was 150 ounces of mix, and I genuinely believe that would be enough. So when I went fishing, I would take probably a pound of bait with me for a weekend. That's what I used to start with, and that's what my first 20 pounder came on it, and it was the Amaretto and the Hutch's protein mix, which was absolutely fantastic.
Did you ever knock a base mix up yourself, or did you always buy?
No, I never ever knocked. Well, I obviously I knocked up trout pellet paste, but I never ever 8 ounces of the 6 in the early days. And to my embarrassment, I remember making the first mix up. I boiled it, and all of a sudden it all floated in the pan. I thought, there's something wrong with this. I've done something, so I'll throw it away. They shouldn't float. Threw it away. Made the next mix up, and it floated again. And I thought, this can't be right. And I started, of course, it floats when it's been boiled, but of course, as soon as you take it out, it sinks. So I'd thrown away one of my 6 mixes. But I have to say that did catch me a lot of fish. That Amaretto and the Hutchie protein mix are really, really good bait. And I didn't start making my own bait then until the Nutribaits days. Really, it was that's when I started. Pre-Nutribaits, I started making my own bait, but it was Nutribaits. It was what became Nutribaits was when I started making my own bait.
Do you feel that there was more edges? I mean, I actually don't like that word, but you know what I mean. Everyone knows what I mean when I say edges. Do you feel there was more edges to be had with bait in that day than there is now?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, but I don't think if you made your own bait today, I don't think generally I think there's too many people putting too much stuff in for you to have an edge. You might have an edge on a hook bait. I don't think the edge will be comparable to a sharp hook and a tweaked hook bait. I think making your own bait is an exercise in, it's like servicing your own car. I don't think it's an edge. I really genuinely don't think it's an edge. I think making your own hook baits can be, but I think making your own bait is just pointless nowadays.
And you feel back then that it could be an edge, could be a real edge.
I remember the first year on the Tylery, I did okay, and then I'd written to Tim, and again this was another landmark. I wrote my first carp fishing article in 1986, and I called it "Who's Kidding Who," and I sent it to Tim Paisley, which was about a guy who tried to claim that he'd had a 27 pounder. It was actually a 19, and it's called "Who's Kidding Who." And I sent it to Tim because his address appeared in Carp Fisher, 217 Cemetery Road, Sheffield. Sent it off, and then I got a letter back within 4 or 5 days saying that was great, but rather than just send 6 pictures of you with a carp, Julian, is there any chance of a scenic shot or something else? And I wrote back to him, and he wrote back to me again, and we built up this friendship. He must have, like Eric, he must have seen something in me that Eric saw in me, and I saw something in Tim that I saw in Eric, and we built up a bit of a friendship so that would be 87. So that was pre-Nutribait. No, No, yeah, 86, yeah, because the Nutribaits, it would be about 86, 87. So it would be about the Nutribaits era.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, you were first involved with Nutribaits before everyone else, right?
Oh,
Sorry,
yeah.
before any other company is what I meant. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I'd used products from other people, and I didn't get my baits for nothing from Nutribaits. I remember going to Tim. I remember Tim saying, "Oh, you need to pop over once, and we'll." I think he was interested in getting me involved in, because I had such a love of carp fishing and carp fishing literature. I knew as much about carp fishing literature, not as him, but as anybody he knew. And I think he saw something in me. And I remember catching the train to Sheffield and then getting a taxi to Cemetery Road, and I went to Tim's house, and Tim will be the first to admit, in those days he lived hand to foot. I remember on a number of occasions I would take him a jar of coffee, and I would take him pens and paper and things like that, because Tim, prior to Carp World, he lived on vitamin tablets and Rivitas. He genuinely did. He genuinely did. And I remember Tim talking to me about bait and stuff, and I had no idea about bait. And I went in his bait cupboard, and there was some SBS strawberry jam EA,
Yeah.
SBS Cornish ice cream EA, and some bergamot. And he put me a recipe together, and it was using that was the first time ever, and it was prior to High Naval coming out.
Yeah.
And it was Benga's, Davina, it was calcium calcinate, it was casein. And that was the first time I ever put a mix together. And I remember putting that mix together, and it was 3 mils of Cornish ice cream, 2 mils of strawberry jam, 6 drops of bergamot, and 1 level teaspoonful of Cotswold Baits Milk B Plus
Milk
or
B
Milk
Plus.
B.
Yeah.
That's the one. And I remember
Yeah.
making that bait, and I'd been using just an average. I can't even remember what I used, but I was using any old crap at the Tyree at the start of the year. I remember I went onto this High Naval, it was the prototype High Naval, and all of a sudden from not having, I think I had 120-pounder before, and then at the end of the year, I think I had 5 or 6 from September onwards, which in the mid-80s up north was really good. And I realized how a good quality bait or a tweaked bait in those days made a difference. It wouldn't now, but then using that in comparison to a ready-made, and I think it was Crafty Catcher Peanut Pro. And when I went on to the lighter High Naval prototype, it was another game changer.
Yeah, I think the thing is, back then, carp were, I don't want to say deficient, but they were certainly more needing of certain things, different amino acids, etc.
Yeah.
Whereas now, I mean, there's so many different arrays of bait going in water. They're just not lacking anything.
Oh no, it was vitamin. I remember I've got all the details here. It was the vitamins and minerals. You'd lose a level teaspoonful of that. You had to go to it wasn't Holland Barrett, but it was a health shop, and I get the Davina, Bengas and things. So literally you made this mix up, and it was a game changer. It was that combination with that flavor, that EA combination, kept frozen. Now that was a trick. You had to keep it frozen in freezer boxes, because if you took it and it was never as good on Saturday afternoon as it was on Friday. But when I kept it frozen, I was getting equally as many fish Saturday night, Sunday morning as I was Friday night, Saturday morning. Again, that was a game changer for me.
Yeah, I mean, everyone used to take their old thermoses, didn't they, to keep it all frozen and all intact. Yeah.
That was sort of mid to late 80s. Well, no, sort of 87, 88 at the Tyree. That was prior to High Naval coming out. That was literally what High Naval was made up of. So I was constructing High Naval from, obviously, before they made High Naval commercial. It was before Nutribaits actually kicked off.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And even the flavor, I mean, obviously the base mix was, very key to the success of that, but that flavor combo was classic. A lot of different baits had similar, and even the essential oil bergamot, that is still a fantastic essential oil today. For the listeners that know, I test a lot of essential oils on carp. A good bergamot, they do vary a lot, but a good bergamot essential oil, although it's not used that much this day and age, it is still a fantastic essential oil.
That was a massive, that milk bee plus. And I never realised this, but it's not a bait I use a lot of, but the Nash bait citrus is literally made out of the same ingredients that milk bee is made out of. A lot of milk bait, what milk bee was made up of, is used in the construction of citrus.
Yeah.
Keith Sykes, of course, was Cotswold Baits, and he put together a lot of the citrus for Nash, and a lot of the citrus is based around milk bee plus.
Yeah, I mean, the milk bee was actually made out of House of Cotswold, though, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Great bait. Oh, great bait ingredient.
Yeah.
Did you find with so with like the High Nouveau coming on the scene that it was a numbers game and you were catching sort of a lot more fish, or do you think it, like back then, it was really picking out the bigger fish in particular?
For me, it picked out the bigger fish. It genuinely picked out the bigger fish for me. Or I caught less smaller fish, but a lot of the fish, I'm not saying it did. All I can say is my results showed me that when I was using the protein mix, certainly September, October, early November, I caught a lot more bigger fish. Now, that could be that they were bigger then anyway, but I did find that mix definitely caught me bigger fish.
Yes, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's sort of stands the test of time, but it makes perfect sense, that the bigger fish are seeking out sort of like that more nutritious.
Then.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the only time I've ever had that happen again was when I used NutriBait's Trigger. Now, Trigger, I'm very much, if you say to me, do you want 317s or a 23? I'll take the 317s anytime. Do you want 322s or a 31? I'll take the 22s. When I went onto NutriBait's Trigger, that caught me probably as third of many carp as I would normally expect to catch, but I caught the bigger ones. Mm-hmm. So that didn't suit me as a bait because that's not my kind of angling. So when I went to NutriBait's Trigger, instead of probably catching 80 fish in here, I was catching 20, 25, but they were a lot bigger fish, So that's the only time that I've ever seen was the High Nouveau and the NutriBait's Trigger, where I caught less fish, but they were definitely bigger.
Yes, fascinating. It is fascinating. Yeah. Like you say, it's like the bait games, again, it's changed a lot, hasn't it? And the fish have seen a lot more bait nowadays, but it's certainly all of the stories of old, and when you read the older literature now, it all sort of it certainly correlates anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry Sam, I've sort of really stopped your flow.
No, so I think we're about 1987, aren't we?
No, not at all. I know it's all fascinating and interesting stuff. 87. I mean, by the way, you were just to backtrack, actually, you're saying that it was picking out the bigger fish, or certainly you were catching less of the smaller ones. At this point, you're catching 20s. Do you remember your first 20?
My first 20 was caught on the Tylery in 1987. And the first session I was completely out of my depth. The second session, I caught a 19-pound 8, and on the third session, I caught a 21.4, I think it was, which was my first 20-pounder. So that'd be 1987. So we're talking 34 years ago, and that was my first 20-pounder. And I was very lucky. It was a beautiful looking fish, but I was fishing a water, and I realised you can only catch what's in front of you. I've been fishing waters before that only had 1 20-pounder in at the right time of years, and I caught that fish probably 6 times up to 19-pound 12. Yet when I went on a water which had probably got 20-pounders in it out of maybe 60 to 80 fish, I ended up catching 8 20-pounders that year. So I realised that it wasn't down to ability. You get to a certain level and then you could only catch what's in front of you. So yeah, 1987 was my first 20-pounder.
Amazing. Do you remember that event?
I do, yeah. I remember I was fishing on at the Tylery on the Tile Bank. It was mid-morning. I was fishing in what was known as the car park corner. I got a run, and I remember I was fishing. It's almost like a baby zig. So because of the weed, we would fish a 6-inch piece of braid straight off the lead with an ultra buoyant pop-up on it, and fire out boilies all around it and fish, pop up off the lead, as we called it. And I remember getting a run mid-morning, striking, playing it. And it kept fighting and fighting. And it was the clear water. And I've got a picture again of one of my friends took a picture of me playing this fish and the bloke about to net it. And I saw it in the clear water. I thought, that is a considerably big fish. As it went in the net, I remember this bloke who was a bit older than me, Jim, I can't remember his second name, but he was one of the specimen group members. And he says, you got your first 20 there, mate. And we weighed it. And it was 21.4. And strangely enough, it was called the Carp fish because it always got caught or seemed to get caught in this corner, the car park corner, which was quite weird. And that was my first 20 pounder. So yeah, I remember catching that. I remember sending the picture off to Anglers Mail. I remember it going on page 3 of Anglers Mail. It was a very pretty 20 pounder. So it didn't change my life. It just felt like I ticked something off. Until probably about the late 80s, I always thought, I'll be accepted when I've caught a big fish. I'll be accepted when I've caught a 20 pounder. I'll be accepted when I've caught a 30 pounder. And it was just a tick to say, I've caught a 20 pounder now. I can go in the magazines. That's what I thought.
It's crazy, isn't it? It's crazy. Yeah. I mean, look, like even to me, a 20 pounder is still a big fish to me. Like it really is. And I think, you lose sight of that this day and age, don't you? I mean, there's people out there catching a 20 pounder within their first summer of carp angling, which is madness.
But you've got to put this into perspective. If you went back to 1960 or 1970 and somebody talked about catching a 15 pounder, then people would fish all season for one bite. Yeah. It's just, as my favorite expression ever, it's just timeline. And you've got to put it into perspective. And the reality is, you go out now and fish for tench, you're very likely to catch a 6 or a 7 pounder. Whereas in the olden days, if you caught a 4 pound tench, that was a good tench. It's just timeline. It's just a natural progression of things, and you just have to put it into perspective.
Yeah. My PB tench is 8.12, and when I was a kid, I would have never have thought I'd catch a tench that big in a million years.
And that's still a big tench nowadays.
It is.
I couldn't tell you what the record barbel is, but people talk about getting 3 doubles in a session. Whereas at one time, if you caught a double fish fugger barbel, you were getting your Angling Times top 10 badge. It's just things have moved on.
Yeah. It's crazy, isn't it? It's absolutely crazy. Yeah. So, I mean, at this point, are you doing overnighters or are you still on days?
I'm doing overnighters. As soon as I'd done my exams, and I've written about this recently. I can't remember what it was. It was for the Carp Society, and it was what we talked about earlier. I got a real love for a number of subjects. So I loved my carp fishing, but I also loved motorbikes, and I loved having a girlfriend. And I realised that if I went carp fishing every weekend, I ended up losing girlfriends. And my mates who were motorbikers didn't want to have anything to do with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, I used to watch Eric, and he would catch his carp midweek overnight, and generally at nights. And I'd go down and I'd see Eric, and I'd spend an evening with him and go fishing every weekend. And I thought, well, why am I going down midweek to see Eric and not fishing? And I thought, you know what? I'll try an overnighter. And the world was never the same again. So I started fishing overnighters. That would be, my first overnighter was 1986. And I fished overnighters from 1986 to 2015. I would say 90% of my carp fishing was overnighters for almost 30 years. Almost 30 years.
Yeah.
That is getting to the lake at 6 o'clock and packing in no later than 6 in the morning, going home, washing my hair, going to work. And I only stopped in 2015 because I was because of promotions, and I was further up the scale. I had to work at Scarborough, Northallerton, and literally you just couldn't do an overnighter and get to Northallerton for 9 o'clock in the morning. So I had to then change my fishing. But for 29 years, it was overnighters only. And when people say, well, God, you're lucky, I think For 29 years, I got
Yeah.
6 choices swim, and I pack up when they were feeding, you
Yeah.
know, and it was hard work. But that's, you know, that's what I did.
I can relate. I mean, that's all I've ever done. And like you say, it's when that penny drops and you're like, oh shoot, I can just do an overnighter. And it's because you've got other things that get in the way of your fishing, like, you know, as you said, women and work and things like that. You do the overnighters, game changer. You know,
Oh,
when I discovered that, you know, I was four nights on the bank, you know, and getting up for work. I didn't wash my hair, unlike you. I was a bit more grubby than you, maybe, but yeah, and it does change your world. But you're right, it's hard graft, isn't it?
it was. I used to say that I would stop my overnighters in October, November, and I kickstart them again in sort of March, April. And that first week or two of overnighters, it was like going back to training. It was like taking 6 months off lifting weights and then doing a proper workout and aching. And the thing with overnighters is you have to get used to them. Your body gets used to them. You get back into the flow of doing it. But they hurt. They really. And nowadays they talk about a cheeky overnighter, and it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon till 9 in the morning. That's not an overnighter.
That's luxury.
Mate, that's luxury. An overnighter is going after work.
Yeah.
You know, to me, an overnighter cannot be more than 12 hours. It can't be more than, you know, because then it stretches into more than half a day.
Yeah. Yeah. You feel like you're on a holiday, don't you?
Yeah. It was the greatest thing ever. But it to me, it was a game changer because I then could, you know, I got all the things I could do. And it's that balance. The only reason I'm probably still doing it nowadays is that I didn't become obsessed, you know, and, you know, fair play to these guys who've given up everything up for carp fishing, but that was never me. That was never me. Looking back, I used to just do night after night, and often it was pointless. If those fish are not coming out at night, doing 3 overnighters in a week when they're not feeding at night is pointless. And if I look back, there were times where really I'd have been better off doing a Sunday afternoon to Monday morning than 3 midweek overnighters. And that's what I've taught myself now, is that there are feeding spells. There are times when a pond in the early season, overnighters are brilliant. And there are time at the end of the season when it's great. But I did find there was a lot of times between June and September, October, June and September, when the time to catch them was 7 in the morning till 11 in the morning. And doing 3 overnighters just made you an idiot. You know, that's something that comes with age. You realize that it's not clever to do 3 nights. You know, it's better to do 1 Sunday morning or have a Monday off. So yeah, that was that. Yes, it has its merits, and it also has its. You've got to balance it with. It's very clever. It's very, you know, it's very tough to do 3 overnighters, but 3 blank overnighters is pointless.
Yeah, and I know what you mean. You when it, you know, comes to short time angling, you got to pick your times, haven't you? And you've got to be aware that when they switch on.
But in the 80s, that's, you know, I was working, and, you know, in those days, your job was, well, it always has been for me, it was above everything else. So I was never going to get to the lake before 5, and I was never going to be able to leave home any later than 8 o'clock in the morning. So really, my fishing was always good, even if it was locally. I was never casting before 6, and I was never. The rods were never later out than 7, and it was more likely 7 till 6, really. So, you know, it was, you know, I was the first. I don't know many other people in the area 86 to 96 who did as many overnighters as me. You know, it was a huge advantage. Yeah, you get people do a few at the start of the season. They'd be gone by July.
Yeah. And at this time, whereabouts were you fishing? Were you still in around your area?
Again, I've always fished locally, as in I'll give myself an hour to an hour and a quarter to get to a venue. So Tylery, motorway, Drax, the Mere, Tyreham Hall, anywhere that was up to an hour, hour and a quarter, because it had to be an overnighter. So if I could get away from work at 5, I was getting to the water for 6, and I was not casting until 7. So yeah, it was local. You know, I was a local angler.
What was your hardware like at this point, Julian? Imagine sort of like the older nostalgic image is sort of like a 50-inch brolly, and you've got a lounger tucked in the back of the car, which you're dragging out.
It was a VW. My first car was a Ford Escort 90. So that was my first car. I didn't get the first car till 1987. It was always motorbikes or girlfriends who had cars. So 1987, I think, was my first car, which was a Ford Escort, £500. 1988 VW Golf Driver. So hardware was an Argus Sun Lounger. And it was a 50-inch Wavelock brolly, the light green ones, and the cheapest of sleeping bags, a pillow from my home, and that was the hardware, and that was tough when you were doing that in September and October. I don't think I got my first Fox bed chair till the late 80s. You know, it's certainly. I would imagine, you know, I did have a Lafuma, but they were so low. They were great, but they were so bulky as well, the Lafuma chairs. So it was tough. It was tough in the 80s.
I bet when those, like you say, the first Fox bed chairs come out, that was a game changer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be certainly the late 80s. It was the late 80s. That was great.
And so when was issue 1 of Carp World? We're talking late 80s, aren't we?
1988.
And how did that play a part with you then?
I was writing for Carp Fisher, and in 1987, Tim appointed me as features editor for Carp Fisher. So he put me in charge of contacting people to get material off them. So all of a sudden, I'm ringing Richie McDonald up, I'm ringing Rod Hutchinson up, I'm ringing Zen and Bodgko up, I'm ringing Peter Springate up, I'm visiting people, and so that was it. And I remember Tim writing to me, and it would be probably the spring of 88, because I think Carp World came out the summer of 88, and he said, do you want to do an article for this new magazine I'm starting called Carp World, and it was just basic carp fishing. I wrote that first article. I remember going into the shops and seeing that classic picture of Rod Hutchinson stood in that sleeping bag with the misty cover, and see my article was the first article. It was the first article that ever appeared in Carp Fisher. So I think it was about page 6. There was obviously the editorial, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But my article was the first ever article in Carp World in 1988. So I suppose that's something to be proud of.
Incredibly so. That's incredible. And I know we're discussing the 80s in this episode, but sort of like the Carp World, and obviously that has been for, I'd say, the majority of carp anglers out there, it's sort of been like the premier magazine.
Absolutely,
gone now, unfortunately. How sort of big a part has that sort of played on you, and how's it sort of the demise of Carp World, I guess, with social media? How's that sort of played a part on you as well?
Well, I suppose it's the natural evolution, isn't it? It's like the death of your parents. It's not comparable, but it's evolution, isn't it? And the thing with print media in those days, if I went to a fishing water in any time between 89 and 96, people would say, "Have you got the new edition of Carp World, Jules? You got the new Carp World?" Or I read your piece in Carp World, because that's where you got your information from. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the world has changed, and in those days, and this is only me surmising, I think a lot of magazines had a readership of 2 years, maybe 3, and then people would move on. But there were equally as many new readers coming through. So you would have 20% of people who bought every issue throughout the life, but there was this 50 or 60% of people who would buy it for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then would leave it alone for a while until they, a year on, they thought, it's actually got better, this magazine, but they were being replaced. And I think what happened is, over the years, the new the drop off, the natural drop off of readers has not been replaced by new readers. And I've said this many a time, you could bring out a 500-page carp fishing magazine and charge £3 for it, and you wouldn't sell 20,000 copies, because people would say, well, I just don't read. It doesn't matter how, it's like a spod. You could bring this best spod out ever and charge £2 for it, and the spod will outsell it 10-1, because we've moved past spods, and the market decides what it wants, and the market has decided nowadays that we don't read print. Go into WH Smith's, there are not as many magazines as there used to be. Kerrang doesn't exist. There used to be 4 bodybuilding magazines, Muscle Development, there was 4 or 5 bodybuilding magazines. There is 1 now. And it's not that bodybuilding is less important. It's not that the magazines are not as good. They've never been so good. Pick up Carpology and Total Carp. They are wonderful magazines. They don't sell what they would sell in 1995 because they're not there anymore. And yes, it is sad to see it go. But I also look back and say, from 1988 to 2018, I would say I was in 70% of them magazines.
Yeah, no,
so, yeah, it's just the way of the world. It's the way of the world. You go and grab an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old off any carp lake nowadays. He isn't going to be talking about cartwheels. He'll be talking about social media. He'll be talking about Facebook and Instagram. Oh, Facebook, that's old school. You've got to be on Instagram. It's just progression, mate. And I was lucky to have the golden years in the 80s and 90s. I'm blessed.
It's a very pragmatic way to look at it as well. It's quite refreshing to hear. I don't know why I thought you'd have an opposing view to that. I thought you might be sort of more upset by it, but you're very open-minded. You see, for me, I don't like change. That's something I've recognised in myself, I think, since having children and all these new fads and whatever. But yeah, I think I'm quite sort of traditional to my time, as it were.
I'm with you, mate. I've never read a book on a computer. I use Facebook for answering questions, and I'll look at stuff on Facebook. I don't ever, if I want to read something, I'll buy a magazine, I'll buy a book. I've never read a book or a magazine on a computer. Now, a full screen computer, anything like that. That's not my thing. Mm-hmm. But I accept as a person who deals with the public that there is a different world. There's a different world, and I still think there is a place for print media, but it's not a place where it can support, the magazines. There isn't the reading. It's not about quality. It's not about how many people go carp fishing. It's about the way that people want to consume things. And I'm sad to see carp will go. I used to love that drop, but I'm sad to see sounds go. I'm sad to see Kerrang go. I'm sad to see, motorcycle, it's not what it used to be, but I've moved on. I can't, it's not in my garden, as I say. Don't stress about stuff that you have no control over.
Yeah, very true. Very true. So back in the early days of Carp World, sort of how regular feature was that? How often were they put to print?
It was four a year. It was 4 a year. So and I was certainly, for the majority of the early issues, it was 4 a year. And certainly in the early years, from 1988 until the 1990, I was in quite a few issues, but I was still a developing name. I mean, when we do the 90s, we'll talk about that. I mean, as an angler, I sort of exploded in probably 1993 when Practical Carp Fishing came out. So that was my era. But certainly in the 80s, I was making my way. I was one of the people making his way through carp fishing. So I'd be in 2 or 3, then I'd miss an issue in 2 or 3. But I was in the CAA magazine. I wrote for every edition. Course Fisherman. I was in Course Fisherman every issue from 1988 to its demise in 2010. So that was 22 years times 12 magazines a year. So that's 200 issues. David Hall's magazines, so in the 80s I started to become, I was one of the people who could deliver material, I enjoyed writing material. I fished a variety of waters, and carp. There weren't that many people writing about carp fish in those days. There were very few.
Mm. And how did you take on that responsibility? So you're saying you're speaking to Tim and you were in charge of sort of sourcing material.
I
That
loved
must
it.
have
I
been
loved it. I
not
loved it.
daunting.
No, not at all. Well, I remember, all of a sudden, if somebody said to you, I don't know, whatever your sport is, if somebody says, right, you're going to work for, you're going to work for Autosport. We want you to ring Alonso up next week. We want you to pop in and we want you to interview Lewis Hamilton. You're probably going to think all your Christmases that come at once. So I was a historian of carp fishing. And when Tim said, right, that's Rod's number, give him a ring. This is Richie, give him a ring. This is Peter Brock's up in Savvy. We want to have a walk around Savvy for carp fish. If you go down to Peter's, you can spend 2 days down there and just do a walk around carp fish. There's no money though. I paid for my fuel. I paid for I wasn't getting paid. And I remember once ringing Richie up because Richie doesn't write. And Tim said to me, with Richie, you need to ring him up, remember what he's told you, write it down, and we'll put it as though he said it. And I remember ringing Richie up and I left a message because I don't know who it was. I left a message and said, could you tell Richie it's Julian Cundiff from Carp Fisher. Tim Paisley says, can you ring him back? He just wants a few words on hook choices. And I lived at home with mum and dad. True story. This lived at home with mum and dad. And my dad and me sound identical. And the phone went downstairs. I'm up in my room because I lived at home for many, many years. And I remember my dad picking the phone up and because our number was Campbellsworth 618148. And so my dad went 618148. I remember my dad going, no. Oh. And of course, Richie thought it was me. And I think he said, all right, Julian. And my dad went, no, it's not Julian. And I think Richie went, you fucker. I know it's fucking You know what Richie's like if you've seen the support every third. And my poor old dad put the phone down and I went downstairs and says, what? He says, I've just had a man swearing at me on the phone. I thought, oh, God, that was... And, so yeah, I drove down to Savvy. I met Peter Brock's up in the 80's. I had a walk around Savvy. I met all my heroes, Andy Little. And I realised that they were just people. They were people I looked up to and are people I respected. And I think that has changed nowadays. I gave them respect and I always mention them now. You pick up any of my articles, people who've inspired me, I've always acknowledged from the 80's and 90's. Nowadays, I read many articles by people and I think you would think they'd invented carp fishing. They never give any nod to people who've helped them, influenced them, got them sponsorships. It's all about, I did this, I did that. And that is one big change is, in my era, you always gave a nod to those that helped you through. Whereas in the modern era, that's there's very little acceptance. And the only time that people do accept things is they might say Terry this and Terry that because they want to add some sort of kudos to their writing. They've never met Terry, they don't know Terry, but yeah, I was impressed by Tell. They wouldn't know if they saw him. So yeah, that's a change. But yeah, I took to it like a duck like water. I was mixing with my icons.
I can believe it. Yeah, and like I say, there's probably not a lot of people now in the modern age who'd probably be driving across the country to get sort of snippets for articles for no money as well. It was your passion, sort of. Plus, you're meeting people who, like you were saying, were your idols. Must have been.
I never did it for money. I would travel down south. I'd meet these people. I remember going down to see Andy Little, and he lived in Aldershot, well, near Aldershot. And I drove down the motorway, and I'd never been that far down. And I came down the came down the M1, and it said M25. Dartford Tunnel, M25 Heathrow. I thought, well, where's the sign for Aldershot? I was expecting to see a sign saying M25. I thought, Dartford Tunnel, that sounds carp fishy-ish. So I went left and got about 30 miles down there, pulled in, then got my map out. And this was well before sat-navs. I realised I'd gone 40 miles the wrong way, turned around. So, that's what it was like in those days. And it was a sense of adventure, driving down to Savvy. No sat-navs then. 4-gear golf that, didn't like going up hills. And it was it was a different world. You know, I'm not saying it was better or worse, but I think it made me who I am today. Yeah.
Did you sort of think to yourself that you're in quite a privileged position back then, sort of doing these journeys
Oh,
and writing the articles?
without a doubt, I felt I was the luckiest. Remember, I'm just this Yorkshire kid. Nobody knows who Tim Paisley gave a chance to. And what Tim did is what I do. He gives people the ball, and it's up to them whether they run with it or drop it. So Tim in the 80s gave me the chance to meet my icons and work with them. And he trusted me because I could have been a total dick. I could have, but there he said, I want you to go down there. I want you to produce this. I need this in the magazine. It wasn't go down and have a little chat. I had to produce material. I had to tape stuff. I had to take photographs. I had to pay for the developing. I had to get the stuff to Tim. This wasn't, most people nowadays won't get out of bed. Oh, what do you mean I'm not getting anything for this? Well, I want my petrol money. I want 200 quid. I did it for the love of Carp, as the Carp Society books would say. And I think that's the reason why now Tim once said to me in the 80s, every time somebody asks Tim to write, he always goes, oh, me? Oh, he says, I'm still surprised. And the same as me, whenever everybody wants me to do a podcast or talk somewhere, I don't go, how much? What's it for me? Or can I sell a book? And that's, I'm from a different era, and the 80s and 90s shaped me.
Yeah, no, well, you can see that. So are we talking sort of late 80s when you made your link with Nash?
1980, 89, I was doing very well, and I literally got a letter on headed notepaper from Kevin Nash. Hi, Jules. I've been taking notice of you. You really seem to be, the usual well done and all that. Would you be interested on coming board with Nash? Well, I was with Nutribaits, which was fine because Nash weren't doing bait then. And he took me on board. I think I got some gear, and then we signed up with Daiwa. And so that's when my first links with Nash came, the late 80s. And I've always been a friend of Kevin's. So we're talking now, 31 years, 32 years. And that's very unusual in this business. I never thought, well, I can use Kevin to get to Fox. I can use Fox to get to Shimano. Then I can get to Ridge Monkey. And then I can get to Avid. And then to me, I was, Kevin Nash has written to me. He's given me a chance. And I'm, I respect that. So, yeah, I've been with Nash on and off for the best part of 32 years.
And that link was purely made by... He's obviously seen your articles and he's approached you.
He saw my articles. He saw what I was catching. He liked the way I wrote. He liked the way I presented myself, and he felt there was a chance for me to be linked with Nash.
And what's Kevin like as a person? Because obviously we see him sort of all through like the social media, and we've seen him sort of with his
very
DVDs
shy.
Gone past, and really, because he doesn't come across like that.
Exactly, and that's the problem with shy people. They often, to overcome their shyness, they appear ebullient. I've always found Kevin to be straight up. I've found him to be very loyal. I found him to speak his mind. I find him to be, he expects from you, he's a workaholic. I found him to be straight up, and he tells you how he feels. He'll tell you, I found him to be nothing but straight up. And there are very few people who have a criticism of Kevin, I suppose, like Danny, who've actually, well, I know a man who knows a man who knows a man who said that Kevin did this. I know a man who knows a man who knows a man that says Danny once did this to him. There are very few people who've dealt with Kevin personally that can say, that he's done this to me. And I can only say that I found Kevin to be straight up. And as far as I'm concerned, I always judge people on how I find them. And Kevin, to me, he's a very strong character, and people either like or dislike strong characters, the same as Danny Fairbrass. People either take to them or take against them. Like, I don't like that Danny Fairbrass. Have you heard him when he says Munger? So you don't like him because he says Munger. That's right. I don't like that Nash. I saw him on a podcast and he's got his own lake. All right, okay then. So I treat people on how I find them, and it's like a lot of people. I wish I had £1 for every person that said, I thought you were right, Dick Jules, but when I met you, I thought you were all right, actually. I say, so why did you think I was right, Dick? Well, you always seem to be right cocky. What do you mean I was right cocky? Well, you're in all the bloody magazines. It's like, what can you do? So yeah, I've nothing but respect for Kevin. And if I didn't, I'd tell you.
Yeah, I think sort of one of the things about Kevin as well is quite often, well, I've heard so many stories about people phoning sort of like the Nash office or customer support, and he often answers the phone.
That's right.
Which is cool, isn't it, for somebody who owns such a big company?
And I always say this to people as well, that if somebody comes up to me and says, I don't really rate those R3 buzzers of yours, Jules, that don't bother me. I'll just think, okay, that's fair enough. That's your opinion. But if somebody comes up to me and says, your last book, Jules, Short Session Success, I'll go, yes, I didn't rate it at all, thought it was poor. I'm going to get very defensive about this because it's my baby. So when people slag Danny's products off and slag Kevin's products off, they're not slagging off the car he drives. They are, in effect, directing a personal criticism at him. And when he defends it, they go, oh, what an arsehole Danny Fairbrass is. He told me, well, yeah, when you slagged him off, yeah, he stood up for himself. So, there's a lot of that, but it's life, innit?
For sure.
We see it in football. I hate him, but as soon as he comes to play for your team, you love him. I hate that Ronaldo. Oh, but now he plays for me, so he's greatest player ever. Same with Kevin. All these people who hate Kevin and Danny, if they rang him up and said, "We'd like you on board, mate." Oh, I love Danny. I love Kev. Best bloke ever.
Yeah, very, very sad and very, very true.
It's life, mate. I remember catching 2020s from up here in the 90s. Now that was good going on overnighters. I remember this bloke saying to me, "Yeah, but it's not like you've had 2020s from Yateley." And I thought, why do they value? And I've never attached any. What they matter to me is all that matters. What somebody else might think about my carp genuinely has no impact on me whatsoever. So the waters I fished were the waters that I enjoyed fishing. So, you get all these people who used to knock me for fishing Yorkshire waters, but they would only fish their local waters. So if you live in Yateley and you fish all the waters within 30 miles of Yateley, you're lucky because you happen to fish a productive area. I fished all the waters within 30 miles of me. The fact that you live in Yateley and I live in Camblesworth or Selby, that's just the way of the world. Your carp don't matter any more or any less than my carp at all.
Yeah, I can resonate with that, living down in Cornwall.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not blessed with many big fish, but there's certainly a few special fish knocking around. Plenty for me to go at anyway. So, are you still there, Sam?
Yeah. No, I've just been listening to you guys and enjoying my beers, and I'm feeling them. I'll be honest, they've gone to my head. There's loads of different kind of offshoots I want to go down from what you've said. Obviously, I want to be respectful of your time as well. No, without. You don't have to answer this. I can edit this out if need be. And without,
I ain't got a problem answering anything now.
Without trying to stir the pot or anything like that. I mean, obviously, you were firmly with NutraBaits for a considerable amount of time. Your time ended with those. How are you able to tell us how that came about? What happened?
Absolutely, yeah. I was with NutraBaits from 1988 to, was it 2012, whatever. And I remember that NutraBaits, in my opinion, it had lost its way, and I think the NutraBaits would admit they lost their way, and they were not in a position to produce bait for me. And I felt that I'd been a very loyal servant to them. I'd turned down a lot of money over the years because I felt that NutraBaits gave me my chance, and I stuck with NutraBaits.
Yeah.
I remember I contacted one of the guys from NutraBaits. I told him what I needed, and I wasn't having hundreds of kilos of bait, and they said they couldn't get me that, and I would have to have, they would produce me my bait for free, but I have to pay to have it rolled. And I remember clearly saying, the day I pay for having my bait rolled, when I've done this, is the day I won't be with you anymore. And I simply, I ended my association with NutraBaits. I'm still friends with the guys from NutraBaits. And I signed up with Nash Baits. It wasn't me saying their bait's better than yours. It wasn't me falling out with anybody. And I keep the correspondence. I'm always very careful. They simply said I would have to pay to have my baits rolled. And when you've been with the company from 1988 for the best part of 20 odd years, and I would say I certainly was a bit, I certainly publicised the bait well. I felt it was time to move on, and that's the truth. I don't have a problem saying it.
Oh, you were with them for a very long time, so I mean, it's understandable you'd feel like that. And you're right. I mean, I used to use a lot of NutraBait stuff,
Yeah.
And it things changed. They did change, you know. Certainly around that time. I think you said 2012.
2000, I think it was about 2012, yeah. And
Yeah.
I was told that I would have to pay to have my bait rolled, and and I said I wasn't prepared to do that. Yeah, and I think I have every right to say that. I'm
Yeah.
afraid if Kevin Nash said to me, we can give you bait, Jules, but you're going to have to pay trade, I would say, whoa. And I don't think Kevin would do that, and I'm very loyal, and you will not find a firm that will ever say to you, Julian Cundiff left us because he got a better offer elsewhere. You will not find one firm, and this is over a career of 35 years, that will tell you that. Now, to me, that says a lot about me, and I'm not sure that there's that many people that could say that. They would say, well, we're in it for business, and that's what it's our it was never my wage. I was put loyalty before cash.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You went straight to Nash, didn't you?
Kevin wanted me on board for the last certainly for 10 years, and I have ultimate respect for Kevin. He could well have said to me, sorry Jules, you can't be Nash Tackle and NutraBaits. But he said, Jules, I respect you. I think you're making the wrong decision, because obviously Kevin believed that Nash Bait were better than NutraBaits, as he would. He says, but I respect the fact of your loyalty, and you're the only, I won't use the word he said, beep, 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 that I would allow to have Nash Tackle and NutraBaits, and he respected me for that.
It was pretty unique.
So
yeah,
that's why I have a lot of respect for Kevin, because Kevin could well have said, Jules, it's one or the other, goodbye. Because there are companies that would say that you're with the wrong bait manufacturer to fit into our program. So I would say that that's the reason I respect Kevin, because he never ever said to me, you have to go, mate. And there are not many people that I could say that about. I would like to say that I was the face of NutraBaits, or one of the faces of NutraBaits, for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I kept my mouth shut. You will not find me ever say, well, Nash Bait is better than NutraBaits. And you'll find that when I do a Throwback Thursday, and it's from somewhere between 87 and 2010, I don't forget which bait I caught it on. I will say I caught it on this. And I see a lot of Throwback Thursdays where the bait gets forgotten about, the tackle gets forgotten about, and I'm always honest about what I used. I put pictures of Daiwa Sensatrons up. I put pictures of my Fox Buzzers up, or the NutraBaits boilies. I've always tried to be fair, and that's the way it is. And I'm sure I've made mistakes, but I would like to say that from the 80s, when I was given a chance, I'd like to say the 80s maybe who I am today, because I was given the chance, and I wouldn't be able to look at Bill Cotton, Kevin Nash, Tim Paisley, or any of those people in the face knowing that I'd let them down. They may think I have, but as long as I don't believe, I'm happy about it.
You weren't wanting to switch t-shirts then? You didn't have a stack of different t-shirts up for your photos with the fish?
I used what I was confident in. Bill gave me Bill and we've got to remember, in those days it was Bill and Tim, and then it was Bill and, let me think, it was Bill and Brian Garner, and then it was Bill and Richard, and then it was Bill. So and it's obviously different people. They gave me my chance, and I would like to say I repaid them tenfold.
I'm sure you did, 100%. I mean, that is the 80s summed up for you.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we've skipped over? Is there anything that you think we should cover from the 80s before
No,
we round up
I
this
think
episode?
I think the 80s was a great lead into the 90s. The 90s is what many people probably of your demographic will know more about. You know, the
Yeah.
practical carp fishing, the
Yeah.
successful carp fishing, the BK guide to carp rigs, the angling times, the carp world, the big carp, the, you know, all those advanced carp fishing. So yeah, that was, as I say, without the 80s, there wouldn't have been the 90s, I don't think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Julian, I cannot wait to get you on for episode 2
Not a
to talk
problem at
about
all.
the 90s. You know, I'm sure everyone will be looking forward to that as well. Thank you so much for
Fantastic.
coming on. It's been
No
an
problem
absolute
at all.
pleasure, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, guys.
All right.
Thank you, Julian.
Cheers, mate.